Hi, so I'm here with a fairly inspirational person, Federico Charosky, someone who has a long track record in cybersecurity and who is really a leader, an innovator, an entrepreneur, someone who really shows us a vision of the future. So, hello, Federico.
Morning, Bill. Thank you very much. The privilege is absolutely mine. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a long track record in industry, lots of experience and so on. So what is it that has driven you to where you are now?
Good question. Big open question to start with. So I guess it's been cybersecurity for me has always been in my life, and this goes back to early years. I was born and raised in Argentina in the 80s in a community that really enjoyed two things: football and meat. And I'm a geek, football hating vegetarian, which means that, as I've said, I think once to you before, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. So computers became a very safe haven for me to find myself when the rest of the world was a bit hostile growing up, and that started really early on with my exploration into the world of computers. The very first kind of BBS systems that allowed me to explore what it meant to use my curiosity to unlock some of those vectors, and it really grew from there. So I've been in cybersecurity since I was literally 8, I think, and was popping boxes when I was a young, eager hacker at the age of 12. And then the industry kind of developed around us. I was very lucky that I was surfing a wave as it started forming, with no real clear direction. We didn't really know what we were doing, but the world started kind of developing this discipline around us that became the massive cybersecurity industry that we're now part of today. So I've been very, very lucky to have been at the right time at the right place, I think. And I guess the thing that I consider myself the luckiest is that I was able to survive what is considered today quite an aggressive bullying situation. But the mechanisms that I developed to survive that became the key parts of what ended up being my professional career. So to be able to use that energy almost in an Aikido way to develop this career has been
Yeah,
quite great for me.
yeah. And you talked about the first things you got involved with computers. So can you remember your first computer that you ever
Oh,
had and
totally.
what that programming language was that you used?
It was a very beaten up Commodore 64 handed over by my brothers. So basic. Was that old beautiful blue screen of programming, and it was a wonderful time. I inherited that when I was 8, alongside with a couple of magazines that had the code there you needed to copy paste to have your own games, and it really went from there.
Okay, so you have a long track record in the industry, and really you've been innovative. You've created companies. You've moved on. What advice would you give to any entrepreneur and innovator who's looking to start that whole career, find money, attract interest in what they actually have? What would be your seeds of advice for those entrepreneurs?
I think I have two, if I can consider them advice, right? There was two things that I particularly reinforced with people when I was having this conversation. The one is on the product or the idea. I notice a lot of people fall in love with the thing that they built or the idea that they have. And I think, in my very humble view, that's usually a path towards blindness, towards a certain amount of creator bias. So what I encourage usually when having this discussion is fall in love with a problem. If you fall in love with a problem as opposed to your idea or your solution, you're going to be much more objective in being able to criticize your ideas to see if they address that problem. But if you fall in love with your idea, you're going to try to find a hole for it, regardless of whether it's right or not. So fall in love with a problem, not with an idea or a problem or a solution. And the second one would be, and this is due to entirely pure personal experience, find a partner. Being the entrepreneur, being the leader, being the MD is incredibly lonely, because everybody that you relate with is a stakeholder one way or another. It's either people that want returns from you or are your employees. So they all have different angles and different perspectives. And one of the things I found the most powerful in going through the journey is find a true partner that is equally co-invested in the success and the journey with you.
Mm. So tell me one thing that you fell in love with that you carried forward.
It took me forever to figure this out, but really what defines one of my key drivers is the idea that because of the skills that we dominate, we're able to stand up on behalf of others that can't. So we are now able to defend organizations that couldn't defend themselves. So I'm able to be that grown up in the schoolyard that I needed when I was a kid, and I didn't have that grown up. So to be able to be that grown up and actually protect people from being attacked is incredibly powerful. I think it's the primary driver for everything we do these days.
Yeah. And if there's one thing that you could fix in your own industry or other industries, what do you think it would be?
There's a lot in the cybersecurity industry that's not right these days, and I normally talk about this. I talk about this quite a lot because it defines us as well. I don't appreciate how this industry has really thrived through the use of black magic, through the use of obscurity, through the use of this perception that we're hidden geniuses and that normal populace wouldn't understand that. I think that's completely fake, and we've made too much money out of that. So if I could change one thing, is I would love the cybersecurity industry to embrace transparency, to embrace the ability to communicate the value that we bring more openly and less about black magic, silver bullets, and jargon that I just think is not conducive to a healthy society.
And when it comes to undergraduates, what advice would you give them on the kind of skills that they should be picking up? Because obviously you have very strong technical skills and you also have people skills and business skills and so on. What advice would you say for them to really focus on?
I think the one thing that we should be focusing on more than anything else is curiosity. I don't think there's a particular skill. I know you're particularly encourage people to pick up a scripting language, and I love Python, and everybody should be Python versed. But to me, the one thing that I miss the most when talking to the early graduates or the people that are still in studying is that native curiosity. I really want people to be able to explore and find tunnels that they haven't really understood and have the self-awareness of, oh, I really want to go learn more about that, whatever that topic is. And I think that's the one thing that I'm seeing is being diluted sometimes in education. Students are very, very used to being given all the answers in a silver tray. Here's all this resource, here's all this power, here's all this knowledge. Great, and we're almost giving it to them. We're stealing the opportunity for them to be curious about it.
Yeah, I'd agree. And what would you say was the best decision that you ever made in your career?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question. I think because it assumes that there are decisions that were good and decisions that were bad. And I'm not really sure I can look at my history like that. The history is what it is. And there were a number of good decisions that I enjoyed. So I enjoyed moving from Deloitte to Core Technologies at the time. And that was a big move because I was leaving a team that I really enjoyed for a very big unknown. And I loved moving from much later in my career from London to the Middle East, because living in the Middle East was an experience that was unique to me. So I think more than my biggest decisions were leaving the teams that I loved in order to pursue something that I didn't know. That was probably the best thing that I've done.
Yeah. And what was your biggest regret?
Probably the same ones. There is one that I carry, and I've had this conversation. I've recently been able to have this conversation, which was really fortunate. As you know, I used to work with David Calder while we were building Backed, and then became ECS Security, and I stayed with ECS Security for a couple of years. And I was looking back in my history, one of my biggest regrets, I didn't spend enough time understanding where David wanted to take ECS. I left ECS, I went to the Middle East, and I loved my journey. But looking back on it, and now that I'm the MD of Quorum, I wished I'd been a better partner to Dave in those first years of ECS Security.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to get more kids into coding and cybersecurity?
I think, I don't know if I have a true advice. I think we're doing a lot of good, right? We're bringing STEM downwards in terms of when it enters the curricula, which is the right thing. I think we're making it more fun. I think as these capabilities become more second nature to us all, it's just going to happen. It's going to be adopted. And I also wouldn't, although I believe and I agree with you in that we should be teaching these skills to youngsters. And I think the best way to do that is not by encouraging them to do it is by making it very easy for them to explore the curiosity. And if their curiosity takes them in that direction, then embrace them. But I wouldn't just necessarily spoon feed STEM to everyone all the time. I'm not convinced that that's the path forward. I mean, I
Yeah,
was taught German when I was very, very young. For 7 years, my school taught me German, and I hated it just because my school forced me to learn it.
yeah,
And I would hate that we kind of create that antibody for STEM in the youngers.
yeah. And so GDPR was a sledgehammer really for the cybersecurity industry. Some people benefit, some companies benefit, some companies don't. And obviously, you work in security analytics, and there's that balance between the rights to privacy against the rights of society and businesses to protect themselves. So it's a very difficult question. But how do you find that perfect balance between those two competing sides?
Yeah, good question. And it is a difficult question. I think something that we're missing as a society is more conversation, more dialogue. I think the privacy trade-off is a trade-off that we've lived with since forever, right? There's always been a trade-off between security and privacy. That trade-off is a necessity for a healthy society. And that trade-off is not static. Depending on the context and the externalities, that trade-off will move from one side to the other, more security-led or more privacy-led, depending on where we are in the world. We've obviously seen a massive shift over the last 20 years to a more security-led world in an exchange for privacy and rights. And I think the problem is that society has felt that that was imposed on them. We weren't really having a dialogue. And I think that's the biggest risk. It's being politically driven as opposed to for the benefit of society driven. And I'd like to see, I don't know how you achieve that perfect balance, but I know what we're not having is the nuanced discussion that should be happening for this to be a joint collaborative approach to that trade-off. And I think what we're missing is specialists. I mean, and the world decries that they're tired of specialists. And I think that that's the biggest mistake. We should be a technocratically led society that is taking input from experts and actually trusting them. But we've developed this resentment against them as a society that is incredibly unfair, and it's damaging our rights to privacy because we're not listening to the people that have the best data signals on this.
Yeah, and I suppose NIST would agree with you by defining 52 different roles in cybersecurity and a vast spectrum. So perhaps that's a problem of articulating the profession so that the media can actually differentiate between someone who does pen testing against a threat hunter and a risk analyst. So in terms of the next 10 years, where would you see, if you were to project 10 years into the future, where do you think the businesses will be? Where will we be facing the key challenges?
Well, there's where I think we'll be, and there's where I'd like us to be. And sadly, those two are diverging over time. I'd like us to be in the Star Trek-like utopia of a society that has been able to take care of everyone and everyone's basic needs to the point where we're able to, like the ancient Greeks, just devote our time towards exploration and thinking and all of the beautiful unlocking of our capabilities. And I think we have some shortcuts to achieving that by projects like, and people like Elon Musk and some of the rapid acceleration on their society that they are bringing the capability to achieve. However, I think that as a society, we're actually moving in the complete opposite direction. I think we're moving into a massive breach between the haves and not haves. I think the educational gap is widening to a point where most of the things that businesses will be doing won't be understood by the biggest part of the population, because the educational gap is growing and it's getting worse. So I think businesses are evolving to the point where they're benefiting from all the technology that we are creating and from all these new ways of working. But I sadly think we're leaving a lot of people behind. And I think that's our biggest challenge right now.
But isn't there a worry that we're becoming more centralized and the large internet service providers, cloud providers in California are increasing their share and dominance on our world? Do you see a world where SMEs and little innovators will struggle? And if so, how would you address that problem?
I don't necessarily know if I see that world. Like these mega conglomerates are definitely there, but they are also the ones that are recognizing that the talent comes from the very, very, very small startups. So I think the ability for entrepreneurs and startups to bring an idea to market, to develop an idea, is not going to go away. I think its funding vehicle might change, and whereas you would have expected it to be something like the CivTech challenges and very government led, and that's a beautiful thing to do because we want to retain that knowledge and that expertise and that value in the country. I think that might ultimately change where more of that funding is coming from private companies. But again, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. It's just a different thing. Again, I can't qualify good or evil. But I don't think we're moving to a future where entrepreneurs won't be able to pursue their ideas. I think we're still there.
Yeah, so hopefully we can keep disrupting, and history has told us that large companies grow large, and they become a big ship, which is quite difficult to turn. So hopefully there'll be opportunities for small businesses to really innovate and become
I
the
think
great company.
so. Something that I've noticed in the last 2 years is companies have lost that. So for the last 10 years, as you know, bubble companies have been huge. Companies that had no visibility of profit, but it was all about market capture and revenue gains. And I think that's been the massive shift we've noticed in the last 12 to 18 months. Companies are now being asked to be sustainable. They need to be profit making. And the market is really correcting for this. You would have seen the tanking and the valuation of some of the big monsters that never did profit. So I think as long as your idea, as long as your business, your vision is of a sustainable company, I think that's going to be the next 10 years. We're going to see companies that actually have sustainable profits and sustainable policies to survive.
So if you see companies like ZoneFox, who obviously grew to a certain size, they grew within Edinburgh, they used the city as their base. Is there a problem that when companies, say like yourself, get to a certain size, they'll be just picked off, so that we might not be able to create the real big world-leading companies as a base, because our great innovators will just get picked off as quickly as they can grow? So how would you address that? How would you create the next amazing cybersecurity company in Scotland and the UK?
There's a definite risk that there is very little availability of money for second stage, right? So Scotland, the UK in general, is relatively easy to start a business, and you can get access to funding for that relatively easy, as far as I can see. But I think there's a lack of second stage investment for that growth moment. So there's definitely a risk there, and it is something we need to address. If the UK is honest in its intent to retain that talent locally, and that's something that we are matching our strategy against for the next 20, 30, 50 years to compete with the likes of Asia or the US, who are very much in that long-term investment. Something needs to fundamentally change. I agree. But I think that's also how the money itself needs to start changing its thinking. If the money is only looking for quick turnarounds, 5-year turnarounds, just to get more profit and invest in the next 10 startups, you're never going to get that 20, 30-year investment. And whereas if you compare to the likes of SoftBank or the investment funds coming from Asia that are very much investing in the next 30 to 40 to 50 years, that's the fundamental thing that to me needs to change. If the UK wants to build value for the next 2-3 generations, then we need to have the ability to look further than the next 3 quarters.
And do you think we're generally risk averse when it comes to looking at high innovation? Do you think that the funding will typically comes with an almost certainty to the market, and they're looking for things that won't quite disrupt?
I haven't experienced very risk-prone investment. Let's put it that way. I haven't seen investors that are going, I believe in that idea. I know there's risk, but let's go for it. Every investor that I've talked to was very focused on Excel sheets. And I think ultimately that's an investment thinking that is thinking about the returns, which is absolutely fair, right? That's the way the market rewards them. I think the type of investment needs to change if what we're looking for is the type of true disruption that you're addressing there. Yeah. True disruption doesn't come from certainty. True disruption comes from massive risk taking and believing in the idea. And again, as I said, in finding the problems that need to be fixed. Yeah. And I think, what I've experienced, at least, I'm not sure it's true, but my experience and my intuition tells me that we're particularly risk averse at the moment.
Yeah, and there's often two routes. One is through this university research, high innovation, high impact, more blue skies. That's going towards the
Mm.
3 to 5 year window, and then people like yourself really starting up a business and providing a focus. So, do you think there is this linkage between universities, higher education, and industry? Do you think universities are working on real problems, or do you think there's a disconnect? So please forget that I'm an academic. I think most people in academia want to understand how they can better network, understand industry's problem, meet up with them, and so on. So how would you create that ecosystem? Do you think there is flaws there? Because obviously the US manages to do this very well. Many of the great companies have been born out of that university infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I love that question. I do think we have the possibility of achieving that in the UK. I think we're quickly learning, but I think we still have work to do. I've seen a very commercial focus on the innovation coming from some of the universities because they're trying to demonstrate that they can also do that. And I think that's great, and it's good to demonstrate that we can, but we seem to be losing a little bit the focus on true disruption, if we go back to that. So an idea from a university is fundable as long as it demonstrates that it can go to market and make a profit. And that's great, but then you're going to fall on the same trick of you're focusing on profit, you're not focusing on disruption. Whereas if you look at things like Israel and the innovation that they do, they are not focusing exclusively on would this be a profitable company. They're aggressively launching innovation through university, through the services, and then private equity collaboration. And that to me is the model that I like us to see replicate more.
Yeah. I think there should perhaps be more spinning in of entrepreneurs really to come into a university to work for a while and then spin out from there. So you live in Scotland now. So what would you say is some of the good things about being here, and what do you think some of the negative things are?
As you know, I'm completely enamored with Scotland. I fell in love with Edinburgh pretty much the second I stepped on it, and this is my second time living in Edinburgh, and this is my hopefully the place I will spend the rest of my life in.
Yeah.
I'm in love with the city, and I'm in love with the country. I think as a country we have an ability to we represent the best of agile to a certain degree. We are small, we're nimble, we're able to have conversations that you wouldn't be able to have in many other countries. I'm able to approach academia, government, third sector, public sector. It's incredibly approachable, even for an outsider like myself, right? I'm born and raised in Argentina, moved to Scotland in 2010, and I'm able to reach people like Keith McDevitt or in Scottish government, or Kevin Gray in NHS. I mean, these are massive, important, fundamental societal pieces and it's people you can just talk to. So the ability and the agility we have as a country is unique, and we should be definitely using that to our advantage. We have the chance to build the quickest, most dynamic cybersecurity country in the world if we just focus a little bit of attention on it. So that's to me the biggest advantage Scotland has. Its opportunity is immense, and I'd love to be able to be part of it. It's part of the reason I'm here.
Yeah, and you're such a positive person, but can you see any negative things? What would you change in the way that things work in Scotland?
Very contentious point, but I think we are sometimes too focused on the past. I think as a country, we carry a lot of history, and having learned about that history, I'm very humble about it, and I can empathize with the baggage that comes with that history. But I think we are at risk sometimes of letting old feuds determine our future, whereas we should be focusing on the opportunity that has been presented to us as a country to be true world leaders. But if we let that be affected even slightly by all grievances or all unfairnesses, I think we're at risk of at least not losing the opportunity, but definitely being detrimental to its outcome. So I'd like us to be more almost kind to our history and draw a line in the sand and take advantage of what's been presented for us right now.
Because obviously we need transformation in terms of our digital infrastructure. I think if there's one thing the current situation shows is that we are very, very fragile. We're still using wet signatures and and things like that. So countries like Estonia and Finland, small countries, really have transformed their whole digital
Mm.
infrastructure so that it works much better. Obviously, if you're saying that we tend to have a history, so maybe some of that history is some of the ways that we've done things that have been successful in the future. How would you change that? It's a difficult problem, and and how would you create that innovative infrastructure in the public sector without actually disrupting it too much, but really show the change moving forward?
I I think we're in the right direction, right? So I think, and I would challenge that. You said without disrupting it too much. I think the whole point is we should disrupt it a lot, and
Yeah,
we should make mistakes, and we should learn from them. We should adopt the principles of fail quickly. I think we are much more at risk of not innovating quick enough than we are from making mistakes in the adoptions of innovation and then correcting course. As you said, and I mentioned before, our history, right? Our history, our history is the tapestry on which we build the future. We should not forget it, and we should definitely learn from it. But if there's something we can learn from it, is that most of the examples you've given are countries that were in much worse starting positions than we are currently today, and they've achieved a lot more, not by being cautious and putting very, very cautious plans forward, but actually embracing disruption in fully and going for it. And I think that's where I think the government can collaborate with academia and with the professional services industries and actually drive that innovation forward. As you say, digital identity, digital signatures, these are small attributes that could contribute to that long journey. But with the amount of knowledge and experience that's already been gained internationally, from South Korea to Estonia, we have a very clear path of the things that have already worked elsewhere. We should just be sprinting towards those so that we could then face whatever next challenge hasn't been solved yet. And the second we become that nation, we become the nation that was able to unlock a solution to a problem that every other nation is following. That's it. We made it. We made it to a point where we are the leading edge of how do we use technology to change society for the better.
yeah,
And that's the world that I'm trying to build in Scotland. So.
yeah. That's excellent. So Bill Gates and Steve Jobs loved technology, probably in different types of ways. They led from the front. They were true leaders. They were people who inspired and who built really massive, successful, and still successful businesses. Which one of those two would you pick as the one that inspires you most in their approach?
Hands down, Bill's Gate. I think Steve Jobs is a great creative mind, was a great creative mind, an incredible leader, and a very effective marketer. But Bill Gates has not only created the industry that we all live in and has been a fundamental part of technology, but his work under the Bill and Melinda Foundation is probably some of the most inspirational work I've ever seen done by anyone. So my admiration for his commitment to making the world a better place means a lot more to me than having the ability to create the iPhone.
Yes. And then outside cybersecurity and the whole computing industry, who would you say inspired you most in your life?
Interesting question. Uh, I I love. There's a couple of big people that I look up to today. Elon Musk is one of them. I love the ability for somebody to not be afraid of the size and magnitude of a challenge, even though they were originally not really qualified and dismissed due to lack of qualification. Uh, Today, probably he's one of the people that I've taken the most amount of inspiration, or I look up to the most, in terms of a kid that did, I think it was PayPal, his original startup, is now trying to move to Mars, and to be so brave as to not let anything constrain your dreams. I think what he's done is absolutely incredible. And so I would say probably Elon Musk these days is my key inspirator.
And I've seen you presenting, and you hold up your books, the books that have inspired you, or that you base a lot of your thinking on. So just can you pick off that one book that you think is the one thing that really is a shining light for you?
There was a book when I grew up that still that defined a lot of my thinking in general, and that's Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke.
Mhm.
That's probably still the book that I have closest to my heart. Science fiction as a whole has always been that exploration of the unknown, and who we can become in that unknown is to me fascinating. But that one book was probably one of the ones that's defined me most intensely throughout my life. So if you haven't read Rendezvous with Rama, highly recommend.
Yeah, yeah. Arthur C. Clarke was really quite a visionary in a lot of the work that he did around satellites and so on. And I suppose a lot of these science fiction writers wrote things that did seem like science fiction at the time, but actually much of it is coming through now.
I think the wonderful thing about science fiction in the golden age, the 1950s to 1960s science fiction, is that it wasn't technology led. Technology was an artifact to explore the humanity of who we were becoming and who we were at risk of becoming. Later science fiction focused a lot on the technology and became very tech heavy. I love that science fiction too, for obvious reasons. I'm a geek. But that early science fiction, the Asimovs of the world, the Clarks, the Bradburys, I think were philosophers. They weren't science fiction writers. They were really philosophers that were using science fiction as a setting.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're probably at the boundaries of change, certainly within cybersecurity and within our industry around the usage of machine learning and AI. Some would divorce the concept of AI and machine learning,
Mm.
but obviously it is something that is going to be required increasingly. So, what's your viewpoint on the way that AI and machine learning will develop in our lives and within cybersecurity?
That's the billion-dollar question, I guess. There's two massive camps in terms of AI. There's those that say that it's going to greatly help society as a whole, and those that are quite scared of it. If I had to pick a side, I would probably err on the side of caution on this one and say that I'm more the ones that are scared. I align with the Sam Harris school of thought in this, that we are not. This might be the first black ball we're pulling from the bag. Whereas we pulled out the black box, almost black, that could have destroyed us as a society, like nuclear at the time, or after that, more of the viral-based weapons. I think AI carries a huge, enormous risk in that we might be building the machine of our own destruction. So I'm quite scared of it. I think we're not there yet, but I'm quite conscious as to the risks if we do this one wrong in general. If we do this one right, I think we are also probably at the doorstep of the most important and significant innovation and piece of technology we will have ever created as a species. So I'm incredibly excited for what happens over the next 10 years to see if we've matured enough to earn the right to develop this technology without risking our own self-destruction. So how it's going to affect cybersecurity, I think it's not cybersecurity, it's going to affect everything. If we do this right, it's going to affect the mere fabric of society. But given how politically minded and short-sighted we seem to be as a society right now, I carry very little hope that we're able to do this in a safe way.
Yeah, because you obviously have smart cities, and there's this dream that everything would be interconnected and that you would have sensors and your fridge would be connected to the internet, and you have smart TVs and so on. Do you think we've really addressed the cybersecurity problem of having all these devices and all of these monitors inside our cities?
No, we haven't. We haven't. I think the cybersecurity industry has talked about it. I think we are starting to mature thinking about it, but I think they are such a basic part of society these days. These capabilities that we haven't fixed it for the whole. We're kind of great at having that conversation indoors, but we haven't made these capabilities secure and easy to consume. They're at the moment they're very easy to consume, but they're not secure at all, and we're exposing our kids and families to risks that are starting to materialize. So no, I think we're not there yet, and I'd like to see more work. And I think this is where the government can take a very aggressive stance and actually be part of that solution.
So 3 months ago, we had a very buoyant economy across the world. There was lots of opportunities, and things have completely changed.
Mm.
So, how do you think our world will have changed when we emerge from this? And how would you aim to kickstart our economies, our communities, and so on?
Huge question. I think the world is heading to an unknown right now. which is going to take a long time to correct for. It's quite shocking, really, to see if you can take stock of what happened and how much has changed in the last 6 months. It's sombering, really, to look at that change. I hope that we become a kinder society. Some of the artifacts that have been put in place to help people survive this have been heartwarming. The speed at which we've been able to develop those capabilities and in which countries have responded by providing financial aid to startups, to people, to individuals has been really heartwarming. But I think we're going to pay the tax of that in the next 10 years, right? So some of those decisions and some of those things that we did to survive the immediate are going to have a long tail of consequences for everybody over the next 10 years. So I'm scared. What I'm seeing is a world that has gone into an unknown with absolutely no plan, while being led by very self-interest politicians in a lot of cases. So I'm really scared. I really hope that we as a society are able to, in our own communities, help each other more. If something that comes out of this is the importance of smaller communities. If we need to isolate again, simple example, if we need to isolate again, but we can at least maintain contact between micro communities of households, almost like the old concept of a tiny village, I think we'll have grown more resilient as a species by doing that. But if we continue to in the way that we are, I think a lot of people are going to suffer unnecessarily. So I'm quite scared, to be honest. I'm finding it hard to be very positive about the opportunities right now. I think that there are opportunities, and the more creative of us, not necessarily one that I consider myself one, I think we're going to find ways of adding true value. And I've seen some of those things happen, right? So the Cyber Scotland Connect group, the Cyber Threat Coalition, these groups that have manifested themselves to help people through this have been incredibly important. And I loved being part of them. So I think we're seeing the best of us come out through this as well. I just hope that we see more of that over the political interests.
Yeah, and if you hadn't have gotten into cybersecurity and be an entrepreneur, what career would you have, or careers would you have liked to have undertaken?
Look, I was this close of going into astronomy and archaeology. So my two other passions were either looking out or looking very, very in. So both astronomy and archaeology are still heartfelt passions that I hope to be able to explore someday.
That's great. And hopefully there'll be a book there. I would expect you to be writing your book about your whole career and your thoughts. Is that something that you've got planned somewhere? Do you have time to do that? I mean, I assume you work virtually every hour of the day.
There's a lot of work. There's a lot of family time. I'm raising two incredible 5-year-olds of the world. So I try to be fair to most of my interest in my life. I don't think a book is here yet. I don't think I have enough to share with the world. I think there's some technical books I'd love to write, and we can have that conversation separately.
No. Tell me the book, please.
So I think there's one that I'm starting to sketch about the benefits of blue teams, but actually more in the way that blue teams can contribute to business outcomes and to organizational outcomes. I think a lot has been said from the technical perspective on incident response, SOC, SIEM, all that kind of the technical stuff. But I think nobody's really been able to write about the benefit that these capabilities can bring in unlocking value. And that's something I'd love to tackle, because I think over the last 10 years, I've built and run enough of these things that I've been able to see them working right and working wrong. So I'd love to be able to write that book.
So to explain blue teams and red teams to our audience.
Blue teams are defensive teams. They're there to help detect and defend organizations against attacks. Red teams are there to emulate those attacks to make the blue teams better. And fundamentally, that's their role, to make those attacks as real as possible, so that the blue team can learn and improve. And they dance symbiotically, right? So one is not as good as it could be without the other. And I think we have learned a lot about how to bring value out of those to the organizations, but they're still very much in the realm of technical specialties. And I want to bring that out. I want to bring that conversation all the way to the board to show the amazing talent and capability that those teams can have in propelling organizations forward.
And a great deal of cybersecurity in the future will be around big data, but we'll call it big data. I know it can be small data, but really data analysis is going to be key to really detecting uh, the, the threats for the future. Do you think we have the skills base to really integrate things like data science, machine learning with cybersecurity? Are we creating two different graduates, one who wants to go off and really understand cybersecurity threats, and the other one who is more keen on analyzing open source data? Do you think we could bring together those two areas together to create these super SOC analysts?
I think we are, and I think it's essential. We, for the longest of times, have not used data to make decisions. We've used intuition, and intuition is great. It's a really valuable tool to use when making decisions. But really, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. Analyzing data in order to let data guide your decision-making process is essential. So the progress we've done in data analytics in the last decade or two has been fundamental in being able to effectively defend organizations. So I think you're totally correct. Our investment in data analytics and the understanding of data and the being able to draw insights from data is going to be a fundamental capability that any professional has to have, whether it's SOC analyst or pen tester or talk about whatever discipline we can't even think about that's going to be coming in the next 10 years. It has to be evidence driven and has to be data driven. The ability to parse data at volume, at scale, at speed with great accuracy is going to be as fundamental as knowing how to program in Python.
And do you think we're good at bringing in other people from other disciplines and other domains? I know that someone with police investigation skills and command and control within a military and police applications do very well in a security operations center, because they can cope well with incidents and they can understand timelines of activity. So how do you think we could develop that analytical mind about thinking like the adversary, thinking like Eve,
Yeah.
and then to use that data to be able to understand quickly how something has evolved over time?
I think the analytical skills are key. One of the gaps I've noticed a lot is jumping to conclusions too early, for example, or having decided what the answer of a question was going to be, so that you're ignoring where the data is actually trying to take you. So the analytical skills are essential in order to be able to make the right calls, again, as I said, and follow the right paths of investigation. So you're totally correct that bringing those skills that other fields have developed really well is essential for us enriching our path. However, the one difference I would say is, I think the one thing that we're missing the most in those teams is actually human creativity. We're so focused on process right now, and it's correct. We need strong processes because processes mean repeatability and they ensure consistency of outcomes. But at the same time, we need to really empower people to be more creative in that space, because a process should ultimately be automated. And that's where we should be applying our skills in getting the machines to do what they're best at: high volume, high power processing of exactly the same stuff in exactly the same way. They don't get tired, we do. But what we can bring as a human is that creativity, is that lateral thinking. And that's where I think we're missing the biggest benefit of bringing people from other disciplines. Those different perspectives and that different experience can be fundamentally disruptive to the SOC or whatever security capability you want. And I don't think we're using enough of that. I think we need more of those completely different mindsets, completely different viewpoints to dynamically shift where the SOCs are today. We're very focused process at the moment.
And how do we fix the human? So probably still the greatest threat is the person clicking on a spear phishing email. It's still the most popular attack into an organization. So you can have the most advanced zero-day threats and so on. As long as one person clicks on that email and installs a backdoor Trojan onto the network, then you are in trouble, because as the Lucky kill chain model shows, that part of actually infecting your system is a very short time window. So how do we fix the human element within inside companies?
I don't think the humans are broken. The reason that vulnerability exists is because we are a social being that wants to help others and wants to trust others by definition. I think we have a situation here where there's one of our fundamental characteristics as humans is being used against us.
Mm.
So I'm not sure I want to fix the human. I think we as an industry carry a responsibility to protect the humans more effectively. The fact that we've said, oh, well, you clicked that link, it's your fault ultimately, because I gave you all this training, ultimately it's your responsibility. I think it's a massive failure of our taking account of the responsibility that's been given to us and entrusted to us to keep people safe. I think the problem here is we are in massive dereliction of our duties by transferring that responsibility straight to every individual out there. I'd like to see us becoming much more aware of the responsibility we hold as a technical society to develop the technologies that also protect people, not just that give them services, so that humans don't need to change this fundamental thing that makes us who we are. I mean, if you wanted to move to a side where every human is distrusting of everything they get and every person they meet and every email they get, you're going to fix the problem, but you're going to have dramatically change who we are as people. And I don't want to do that. I want us to be able to shine and thrive with these genetic advantages and what they've enabled us to achieve. But for that to happen, we need to acknowledge that the failure is on us as an industry. We should have done better to keep people safe. We've failed people. And by moving the responsibility to them, saying you need to train yourself to be more aware of phishing, I don't think we're doing the right thing. So I think we don't fix the humans. I think we fix the industry.
Well, thank you so much for answering all my questions. Do you have any last comments for our viewers?
I think I have more of a question for you. If you had to think of the one thing that we could have done better, if you had a time machine, you can go back 10, 20 years in time and teach younger Bill Buchanan something important. What would you say would have been the biggest thing that we could have done better?
Probably, if we just look at cybersecurity, I would have
Yeah.
stopped the internet at one point and say that's it. It's all legacy.
Pull the plug. Don't do
Yeah,
it, guys. Don't do it. DNS is a bad idea.
Yeah, usernames and passwords really are only fit for mainframe computers. Ethernet is in no way any way to build societies. But we got there, and my goodness, has it been a strange journey of impact when you think back to where the internet was. And it was just a bunch of protocols, TCP, IP, ARP, and all these things. And really, we're building whole societies, whole worlds. We're now completely 100% dependent upon it, as much as we are with our electricity supplies. It is a necessity. Our Wi-Fi is there if we were to lose that link. So we've become extremely dependent. But my goodness, have we lost something of, as you say, our humanity? We are driven by the machine. We are slaves of this machine. I think it was 100 years ago, Metropolis was created, and in that film, as you love sci-fi and things like that, the people worshipped the machine. So at that time, it was the mechanical machine. It was transforming the world, and we changed. And every single era, we've changed. We're now into this new industry, and this industry is soft. It's software and virtualized. So we're coping with it, but I think, as you say, we need to worry that we are creating an inhumane system that is a machine, and we are slaves to it. If you see people standing at bus stops, they will be checking their phone for messages and so on, and everything becomes virtual now. So hopefully, one thing, as you say, we should come out of this is really that that machine needs to drive our communities, our own family lives, and so on, much more. But as you say, I can't see that happening. I think we'll become more and more slaves. More and more things will become driven by AI, and the opportunity to spy on us for every single microsecond will be will be there. So there's a long answer.
It is a long answer, no, but it's a deep question. So I'm glad the way you took it. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we do this again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.